One of the important plot-setting developments narrated early on in Ursula K. Leguin's sixth and last Earthsea novel, The Other Wind, is the relation between two kings, the king of the Kargs and the king of the archipelago, the other peoples of Earthsea. And everything revolves around a demand that is made by the new High King of the Kargs upon the, at that time, reigning for roughly 15 years, King of Earthsea, Lebannen. And it has to do with a ring and with a princess, as yet unnamed. We're not going to find her name out until considerably later in the novel. And so Lebannen has been king of Earthsea really since he came back from the land of death with the archmage Ged, and Ged did homage to him on Roke. Soon afterwards, he's going to be crowned. We saw that in the fourth Earthsea novel. And now he's been reigning for quite a while. So we find out that one of the things on his mind is the emissaries of the High King of the Kargs. They're about to take their leave, having accomplished their mission to Havnor, to their own satisfaction, if not at all to that of Lebanon's. And he says he looked forward to the visit of these ambassadors as the culmination of years of patient overture, invitation, and negotiation. For the first 10 years of his reign, he had been able to accomplish nothing at all with the Kargs. Why? The God King in Awabath rejected his offers of treaties and trade and sent his envoys back unheard, declaring that gods do not parley with vile mortals, least of all with accursed sorcerers. And the Kargs view the rest of the residents of Earthsea, which they don't actually know how big the lands are, and that the Kargs are actually just a small portion of it. They view them as dark, accursed sorcerer folk that have betrayed, some ancient pact, and they used to send their people out to raid. This is how Ged actually, in the very first novel, was able to display his magical abilities fighting against the Kargish warriors. And they're a rather insular people, pun intended there, because everybody on Earthsea is living on one island or another. But the Kargs are really a people apart. And the God King, who was part of essentially a new religious cult, a fairly new religious cult going back just several generations, had established his power as supreme, and also, viewed the other Earthsea people as not even worth dealing with. Then something happens. There's a new thing, but it's also kind of an old thing. So, from illicit traders, news first came of the rise of the High King. On Her, the big poor easternmost island of the Kargad lands, a warlord Thol, who claims descent from Thorig, who was a very important character in the backstory, going all the way back to the tombs of Atuan, right? Thorig is leading a revolt against some of the others who will eventually become the God Kings. Thorig and the god Wula had made himself High King of that land, of the easternmost island. Then he conquered Atnini. Then with a fleet and an invading army, he declaimed dominion over the rich central island. While his warriors were fighting their way towards Awabath, the capital city, the people of the city rose up against the tyranny of the God King, slaughtered the high priest, drove the bureaucrats out of the temple, threw the gates wide, and welcomed King Thol to the throne of Thorig with banners and dancing in the streets. The God King fled to the tombs of Atuan. There in the desert, one of his priest eunuchs cut the God King's throat. So Thol proclaimed himself High King of the four Kargad lands. As soon as Lebannen finds out about it, he sends ambassadors to greet his brother king and assure him of the friendly disposition of the archipelago. Does that produce an immediate result? No, that leads to 5 years of diplomacy going back and forth. And it's understandable, right? So Thol first has to consolidate his power, but he himself is also a little suspicious of the Earthsea archipelagans and the High King at Havnor. It meant nothing to him. Their king talked about friendship, flourishing, the ring of peace. Why? Because the ring itself is kind of a bone of contention, right? Eric Ethba brought the ring, which was not originally his. It was a gift from Mored to Elpharon. He brings it, and it's broken by the high priest who he fights with. And Eric Akba gives one piece to Thoreg, who is going to, as we now see, his lineage is restored here with the new High King. So, the ring, who does it really belong to? There's a good claim on the part of the Kargish people that the ring might have originally been, Alpharon's, but it's really theirs. And so why do the Earthsea people have it? Well, because it was stolen from the Kargish people, right? The priests of Awabath broke the pledge, broke the ring some 40 years ago. Sparrowhawk of Roke and Tenar of Adawan healed the ring. What of the peace? That had been the gist of his messages to King Thol. And then suddenly an envoy comes. Ships come sailing up. And Thol sends two main things. There's a lot of people along in the ships. The most important is his daughter, who at this point is unnamed. And you can't even see her because she is covered with a veil that goes from the brim of her hat all the way down to her feet, red with gold lines in it, right? Something like a chimney, as one of the women says. And also a message. What is the message? The message is, let his daughter wear the ring. This is not just a fashion symbol, though. This is incredibly important. It is fraught with implications, as we say. So here's what he actually says. Let the daughter of Thol, the High King, who sits on the throne of Thoreg, and whose ancestor was Wullah, wear the ring of peace upon her arm as Queen Elpharon of Solea wore it, and this will be a sign of everlasting peace between the western and the eastern islands. So what he's offering him is essentially a normalizing of relations. Take my daughter, give her the ring, which, by the way, means marrying her, and you'll be my son-in-law, and our lands will have peace forevermore. Doesn't that sound great? What a wonderful offering. Lebannen, not so cool on that offer, right? He's avoided getting married all this time. Now, he is a king, and we know this in the history of our own Earth. Many marriages were made not on the basis of knowing the person or being in love with them, but on the basis of creating important alliances. This was something that was very often done, for example, in the Middle Ages, but even in ancient times as well. And so the question is, what is Lebannen going to do? He takes a middle course. He doesn't accept. He doesn't reject. He doesn't deny. He says, the High King Thol does us great honor. You are welcome here, princess. Let the princess be lodged in the river house, and let all be as she desires. And so this is doing some great honor. This is putting the princess, who now he has to figure out, what am I going to do with this woman and these demands, at a bit of a distance, right? She's not lodged in the new palace with him. And he can defer and delay to a certain extent. He says, cheese in a rat trap, a pig in a poke, a piece of goods, the ring on her arm and the collar round my neck. This gives you an idea about how he perceives it. Lebannen is not happy. As a matter of fact, he is uncharacteristically angry as his server Oak realizes, and as Tenar is going to realize as well when she comes to visit. He's angry because he feels that he's being tricked, being used. And he says, Oak, by my name I will destroy Thol and his kingdom before I let him use me as a footstool to his throne. He had not said he accepted the offer of the princess as his bride. All agreed she'd been offered to him as his bride. The language about Elpharon's ring barely veiled the offer or the bargain or the threat, but he had not refused it either. His response had been to say she was welcome, that all should be as she desired, and she should live in the river house. Surely that was significant. So we've got some interesting things going on. And fortunately, Tenar is coming to give the prince counsel, or the king counsel rather now, for a separate issue that's coming up. But she says, you can help me with this as well. And he tells her, for 5 years I've built up trade and tried to keep on good terms with Thol because he's a warlord and I don't want my kingdom pinched as it was in the last king's reign, Maharion, between dragons in the west and warlords in the east, and because I rule in the sign of peace. And it went well enough until he sends this girl out of the blue saying, if you want peace, give her Elpharon's ring. Your ring, Tenar, yours and Ged's. And Tenar says, well, she is his daughter after all. And he says, what's a daughter to a barbarian king? Goods. A bargaining piece to buy advantage with. You know that. You were born there. And so he's talking about the sort of realpolitik, of ancient kingship. Daughters who will become wives are basically bargaining chips. And, we don't know anything about her at this point in time. And he says she can't even communicate, Tenar. And so Tenar says, there's another way to look at this. I'm going to go and speak to her because we speak the same language. And what does she find out when she goes and speaks to the princess? The princess doesn't even know there's other languages, and she has no idea what's going on. She just sees people muttering gibberish at her all day long. And, it's very disconcerting. She thinks that all the people are mocking her by chattering and yapping like animals without human speech. And she's grown up, in a very isolated environment, so she's afraid. And Lebannen then says, well, I can't marry her, I'll send her back. And Tenar says, whoa, if you do that, you are dishonoring her, and Thol might kill her to keep the dishonor from his house. He'll certainly consider that you intend to dishonor him. And so, they come to a resolution, which is a resolution to delay a bit more, but one that's actually going to be very important for the plot of this novel. She's got to be able to speak his language. And until this new princess from the Kargish lands can learn Hardic, through Tenar helping her, he doesn't have to make a decision at all. So he says that, I'll tell Thol, a Hardic king can't marry a woman who doesn't speak the language of the realm. I don't care if he doesn't like it, he needs the slap, and it buys me time. And so Tenar says, you'll ask her to learn Hardic? And he says, how can I ask her anything if she takes it all for gibberish? What possible use is there in my going to her? I thought perhaps maybe you'd speak to her. You must see what an imposition this is, using this girl to make Thol appear my equal, using the ring as a trap. I can't even seem to condone it. But notice what he says next. I'm willing to temporize, to delay, in order to keep the peace. Nothing more. Even that much deceit is vile. Tell the girl what you think best. I will have nothing to do with her. And he leaves a carefully worded message for King Thol, expressing his appreciation of the honor of the princess's presence and the pleasure he and his court would have in introducing her to the manners, customs, and language of his kingdom. He said nothing at all about the ring, about marrying her, or about not marrying her. And so this is, quite important. And the ambassador says, the High King will be pleased. So the High King is getting more or less what he wants. Maybe he'll marry her. If he doesn't, then they get to have a nice war. Lebannen is not happy at all about this turn of affairs, but at least he's put off the problem for the time being. Whose interests have not been consulted in this at all? The princess, who at this point, we have no idea even what she looks like or, what her name is. And we haven't had her consulted at all in this matter.